Hello, everyone. My name is AJ Kuftik. I am a digital product strategist with Expedient. I want to thank you for joining me today. Today, we have a very, very special webinar today for you. We're talking with Liam Eagle and Melanie Posey from 451 Research. Before we get into the conversation, just real quick housekeeping note, please enter all of your questions down here, somewhere in here, into the Q&A panel. That helps us keep track of the questions. This is your chance to get your cloud questions answered by two very, very smart research directors at 451 Research. If you ask a question, you're enter win a prize. That prize today is a $100 Best Buy gift card. Also, all of this is being recorded, so if you have to step away, if you want to show this to someone else, you want to go back and re-listen to the amazing knowledge and insight that Liam and Melanie are about to provide, please check us out on go.expedient.com/webinar replays, youtube.com/expedient, instagram.com/_expedient, and linkedin.com/company/expedient. Go ahead and give us a follow on all of those. And with that, I'd like to introduce our three panelists. Actually, I think we have four panelists today. We have Mike Fulton, who is our VP of Product Strategy at Expedient. Hi, Mike.
Hi, AJ.
We have Liam Eagle from 451 Research. Hi, Liam. And we have Melanie Posey, also of 451 Research.
Hey, y'all.
So we have a really great presentation today, and kind of going through just some questions that we have and we've seen in the field from a cloud migration standpoint, but also just kind of where cloud is going. Liam and Melanie and Mike spend a lot of time talking with clients, talking with customers, understanding where they're going and what their insights are. So I'm going to start with Liam. So let's just get this out of the way. How do we see cloud computing evolve over the next 5 years? We've seen a lot of changes over the last 2 to 3, but where do we see it going from here?
Sure. So as you said, a lot of our perspective is based on conversations that we have with enterprises, and that those conversations take the form of, speaking to them, and also, between Melanie and I, we conduct a lot of survey research as well. So I guess generally speaking, we see cloud, becoming a bigger and more critical part of the IT infrastructure of most of the organizations that we talk to. And that includes both the surveys and sort of the general conversations. I think there's a couple of ways that idea, a bigger part or a bigger, more critical part of the IT infrastructure sort of manifests in the survey data. So first of all, we ask them, where are you planning to operate applications in the future? And we see kind of a continued progress toward running more workloads of every kind in public cloud, in hosted private cloud type of environments, in SaaS environments. And then we also see most of the respondents to our surveys telling us that their plans for cloud are hybrid, right? That is, they're planning to use more public cloud, but only a very small portion of them, think they're going to go all in on public cloud. And those tend to be like smaller companies or very young companies, the kind that you would sort of imagine don't have a lot of investment in existing on-premises infrastructure, or they don't have, a lot of data center lease or things like that. And then another major point that we see in our surveys is that cloud in general, and that this isn't exclusive to public cloud or any particular type of cloud, but that generally cloud is considered the technology with the greatest potential to have kind of a transformational impact on the business of the organizations that we survey. And then every organization, or nearly every organization that we survey, kind of expresses some level of commitment to this idea or this premise of digital transformation, right? So, everybody's kind of thinking about digital transformation as somewhere they're going. Cloud is a critical technology to that transformation. But only about half of them are sort of actively executing on a plan for transformation. I could probably say more, but I don't want to monopolize.
Yeah, and I can jump in with some additional perspective on that. One of the big things we're seeing in the evolution of cloud is that cloud has become increasingly traditionalized, if that's actually a word, in the sense that cloud used to be this science project, cutting edge kind of technology that companies that were born in the cloud, or digital native, like your Netflix or your Spotify's of the world, that cloud was all well and good for them, but we're a traditional enterprise company. We got data centers, we got mainframes, we're running mission critical big stacks of Oracle and SAP. So cloud is not for us. This is about 15 years ago when AWS first came onto the scene with S3. But now we're seeing cloud become increasingly embedded into the mainstream of IT. And to Liam's point, it's not necessarily you have to be all in on cloud to benefit from cloud. And increasingly, we're seeing that cloud is no longer this either or kind of thing, that for some organizations, these workloads work best on-prem, and these work best in the public cloud. But I think increasingly as organizations start digitalizing their business operations, as business becomes more distributed from a supply chain and partner perspective, and also as consumption in the economy becomes increasingly online and distributed as well, cloud has a role to play in terms of providing that agility and speed and fast time to market. And it also plays a role in being able to expand your business quickly as new opportunities arise. So, cloud is technology, and it's also an enabler for a broader business strategy that allows you to respond quickly. And, in fact, what it is cloud allows you to, fail fast and succeed at scale.
Yeah, I really like where you're going with that, Melanie. When I talk to folks about this particular topic, I talk about cloud and digital transformation really being hand in hand. Digital transformation is really about transforming your business model or your customer experience. It's not really about technology, although technology is an important piece of it, but it really is about that business transformation of how you're engaging your customers and the people outside of your company. Cloud is one of several technologies that can support a digital transformation. But I would actually argue that it's probably the most foundational. It's the one that is kind of table stakes for any digital transformation because of all the things you just described. Its ability to enable you to create this new way of working, to work in an environment where you can fail fast, you can learn from your customers, you can try things out and experiment. And that's one of the real interesting, powerful elements of cloud computing.
I think the big takeaway that I got from Melanie was that it's moved from or to and. It's not cloud, it's not on-prem or cloud, it's on-prem and cloud, or colo and actually, and cloud.
To that point, I might add that, because if we're talking about, where is cloud going, one of the places it's going, or one of the ways in which the landscape is evolving is that, cloud is coming on premises, right? So we see, we talked about the sort of, broadly felt commitment to the idea of hybrid cloud. So they're embracing, cloud platforms, and they're embracing cloud native application architectures, and they're setting those things up internally on premises as one component of that hybrid cloud. And, in a lot of cases, that's bringing new things into their environments. And that includes, in some cases, the sort of on-premises nodes of the big public clouds, so like the AWS Outposts kind of thing, or it includes asking for more cloud-like consumption of, the hardware that they're buying from like a Dell or an HPE, and we see those kinds of resources evolving and how they're consumed to be intentionally more cloud-like, right? So that's another way in which the cloud is evolving. It's kind of spreading to other things.
Yeah, I would say what we say is that cloud is no longer a destination, it's an operating model, right? And it used to be that cloud was, I'm going to go pick one of the three big hyperscalers, or actually, if you look back a few years ago, it was really probably more too. I was going to pick Azure, or I was going to pick AWS, I'm going to go all in, right? And everything's going to go there. That was what a lot of organizations were taking as a big strategy a few years back. But I think as Liam and Melanie have very rightly said, it's a lot more nuanced now. People are starting to see that they have to really look at things on an application by application basis, because certain clouds are good for certain purposes, right? You might be able to leverage Azure alongside of your Office 365 to do some interesting things on your end user communication space. You might want to leverage some of the cool new artificial intelligence from Google, or you might want to leverage an enterprise cloud that's purpose built and fit for your VMware-based workloads that are running some of your core business on a day-to-day basis, where you don't necessarily need the burstability that your hyperscale clouds are designed to provide. And so it's really about trying to find the right place for the right workload now, I think, which is a lot more nuanced than it was just a few years back even.
Yeah, Mike, to that point, we have this way of looking at workload placement at 451, which we call the best execution venue. And to your point exactly, you have to look at a lot of different factors when you decide if cloud is right for you, and if so, which cloud is the right cloud. And a lot of that has to do with maybe broader organizational factors related to, sort of how you feel about security, how you feel about your data being out there in the cloud. And then you get to the kind of workload level, like what works in a cloud environment. Because one big thing we're seeing as cloud evolves, we're seeing an evolution of how people are thinking about their applications too. And how do applications get modernized? How do applications get built is another big factor that plays into what is the best execution venue. And then I think the last thing about cloud, to your point that cloud is not so much about technology as it is about business strategy. How does the speed, agility, flexibility, scalability benefit of public cloud play into your own business model? How many people do you need to get to? How many different partner or suppliers are you working with? And what's the eventual geographic remit of your business? And public cloud can help you out with all of those things. And it needs to, all those things, business, operational, and technology factors need to go into your best execution venue selection process.
Can I borrow that? I'm just going to, hey, listen, if you guys hear this going forward, Melanie did it. It's Melanie's fault. I think what's actually interesting is that my next question was, how does cloud enable digital transformation? But you guys just took care of that one. I do think, though, that it's interesting to hear how and why specifically cloud actually enables that, right? And it's how does a business, Melanie, you mentioned earlier, companies that have mainframes, old physical hardware, what is the model that you see those companies taking to actually go move to a digital transformation model, or does there still seem to be some hesitation?
I think to a large extent, the sort of successful companies moving into the digital era are those that can take a pretty sort of clear-eyed view of their technical debt that they have currently. And when you think about technical debt, it's not just about like how much big iron hardware do you still have, sitting in a data center. It's also about how do those applications that run on that big iron, how are they constructed? How are they built? To what extent is the software or the application a monolith that, you can't really easily separate this function from that function in the software stack. So, I think the first thing that companies that have legacy debt need to think about is what workloads do we need to run our business? What applications help us sell more stuff, serve customers more profitably, have a more efficient supply chain and operational model? So I think that's the first place that companies need to start thinking about, like, what do you want to be when you grow up to be a digital company. And then you take a look at the technology that can eventually get you there. And another part of it is looking at your culture as well. That's one dimension of digital transformation that we didn't talk about in the previous question is your company nimble and agile enough? Are you organized the right way in order to make any of this happen?
Yeah, I might add to that, and this maybe is, the first time that I'll say this on this conversation, probably not the last time, is that when you say like, how does cloud enable digital transformation? The answer is definitely, it depends, right? And, because, digital transformation isn't like an exact roadmap that every organization gets to follow. And the reasons that organizations are, pursuing a digital transformation strategy are not, uniform or universal. And it's also certainly, I think, Mike made it pretty clear, this is not necessarily about adopting a particular technology or having certain things show up on your budget, right? It's like, these organizations generally, well, they might mean different things when they say, I want to transform digitally. It depends on what their starting point is. It depends on how they do business already. And I think, generally they're talking about applying new technologies to sort of processes across their whole organization. And they want to do things like engage better with their customers and, provide better tools to their employees and maybe react faster or react better to, disruptive things that are happening in the markets they serve. And then ideally also introduce disruptive things into the market, right? Create a platform for innovating or a means of innovating that can allow them to, create some disruption in the markets themselves. And so I think that, specific technologies are going to vary by company size or vertical market, or sometimes maybe geo, but, again, we said cloud was sort of generally referred to as the most transformational technology. 100% agree with Mike that it's a foundational element, because if you look at the rest of that list in our surveys, it's things like AI and machine learning, IoT and edge computing, better data analytics tools to make better decisions with the, organizational data that we have. And, if you look at that list, most of those things are things that are being innovated on by the cloud vendors, or things that are, operated best on cloud environments. And so, cloud is going to be a piece of how do we get to a really effective, and also, by the way, none of those things sort of exist in a vacuum, right? You don't collect data from IoT devices to just have the data, and you don't deploy data analytics tools to just buy some, maybe you buy a data source, but you have an outcome that you intend from that as well. So, all those things relate back to cloud as an enabling platform. So I think cloud sort of, for no matter what you're doing, it's very likely that cloud fits the bill as the way that you're going to accomplish that thing.
I think the interesting part there is that you're not buying analytics for the fun of it, right? You're doing analytics because you would like to understand that data and understand what you can do with that data, what sort of data insights you can actually glean from that. And how does, Mike, before I get into that, I think that's sort of the interesting is what is the goal? What are you doing? What is the point, and aim for that?
I think the more likely scenario, I mean, like you're describing, most companies don't have, a team of crack data scientists with nothing to analyze. The much more likely scenario is they have a ton of organizational data that they've collected and they don't know what to do with it, right? And that's the nut that a lot of people are trying to crack that we see. And that's a big part of the digital transformation, right?
Yeah, and so one of the things that I wanted to share with folks as we talk about this idea of digital transformation. So I teach digital transformation here in town at Ohio State. And in my teachings, one of the things that I leverage and have seen as incredibly relevant in the client organizations that I've been a part of for the last 25 years is what MIT calls the 5 building blocks of a digital enterprise. And those 5 building blocks are your operational backbone, your shared customer insights, your digital platform, your accountability framework, and your external developer platform. And I think in this context of technology, whether it be cloud or whether it be AI or IoT or whatever it might be, it goes back to what Liam was really just talking about, which is, what are you actually trying to do? What's your, it might have been AJ, I'm sorry, that said, what is your goal, right? If you're just getting started on your digital transformation journey, one of the things I teach is that the first place you need to start is to shore up your operational backbone, right? And if you're working on shoring up your operational backbone, your ERP systems, your CRM systems, making sure that those are up, running, stable, you can access the transactional data out of those systems. If that's the thing that you need to do, that's going to be a whole different set of goals and objectives that you're going to want to do than if you're trying to stand up your digital platform where you're engaging customers, you're learning from their experiences, you're running experiments on how they view your digital products, right? It's a completely different world when you're in that experimental phase than if you're trying to run that operational background that's supporting your financial systems, right? You're not experimenting on how you're going to cook your books, hopefully. So you got to really understand where you're at in that digital transformation journey and leverage the right tools at the right time. And I think different components of the different cloud vendors are going to be interesting, useful, and powerful depending on which part of your building blocks you're focused on and what your goals and objectives are.
So as we've kind of gone through, and Liam and Melanie, you both speak to a lot of customers and go through a lot of surveys. Have you seen, big challenges arise as a big theme, or migration lessons learned from these companies that are trying to make their move to the cloud and they didn't necessarily have a goal in mind? What sort of lessons have we learned overall from the general populace trying to make their moves toward the cloud with having all of that technical debt involved?
Well, one of the things we found is that sometimes organizations don't necessarily map out what needs to move to the cloud right now, what could benefit from moving to the cloud right now, the lift and shift model of things. And one thing we found in our data is that the proportion of organizations taking a straight lift and shift model to public cloud has been on the decline over the last 3 years, because a lot of that low-hanging fruit has already been picked. And what was easy enough to do has pretty much already been done. And we're moving into this next phase of organizations maybe being a little more mindful and thoughtful about, okay, how do we tackle this second batch of applications? Do we take the approach where we modernize the application, keeping everything else on premises pretty much the same, but we refactor the application and we upgrade the infrastructure on which it rests, and we keep everything in place? So that's the modernization in place approach. And a lot of people are doing that. Then the other approach is, we refactor the application, then move it to the cloud. And increasingly, we're seeing that organizations take this refactor and shift approach a little bit more for their, kind of traditional applications. But then another way to do this is, we have a net new thing we want to do in our organization. Let's just take it to the cloud as a first resort. So that's another way of doing things. I think what organizations really need to do, back to our original point, that you need to identify what the point of it is in the first place, and then decide what the best way to go about it is. But kind of a headlong rush to the cloud as a way to get rid of your technical debt is not the best approach to take.
Yeah, I have a pretty similar thought on that. I think the other thing that we're seeing maybe a little bit more of, Melanie, is the sort of the lift and shift and then refactor later as an approach to moving things to the cloud, or I lifted and shifted and it didn't really give me what I wanted, so now I'm looking at how do I refactor it now that it lives in cloud, right? I think, part of the explanation for that sort of decline in just the straight lift and shift is maybe that, most of the folks that we talk to have roughly the same set of objectives when it comes to adopting cloud, right? Which is some combination of agility, performance, cost, availability, security, with emphasis on different aspects of that, depending on who they are or what they do, or the particular workload or the particular, time of year or whatever. And of course, as we have been discussing, cloud is a way to accomplish all of those things, but it doesn't really deliver any of those things out of the box, right? Each of those kind of represents its own engineering challenge or its own operational challenge. And in fact, each of those potentially, represents a skills gap for the organization. And this is something that we talk about a lot, Melanie and I, is that sort of, companies don't necessarily recognize that they don't possess the skill set to execute something correctly or effectively or in the way that they wanted to in public cloud until they start trying to execute. And of course, this can have pretty serious consequences for operations, particularly if those skills gaps, for example, have to do with security or with, optimizing for cost, where, the impact of getting it wrong can be very bad. So many of the skills that we're talking about here, they're difficult to develop. They can be very difficult to retain. And this is one, I think, reason why we see pretty consistent plans among the businesses that we survey to increase the amount that they're working with sort of external managed service type organizations or professional services to help with how they're accomplishing things in cloud, particularly when it comes to some of those sort of newer models or newer technologies like AI or like, advanced data analytics or, DevOps processes and capabilities or, implementing edge and IoT projects. And so, one of the surveys that I sort of personally do at 451 is called Voice of the Service Provider, which is kind of, instead of surveying enterprises, we're covering a lot of the same topics, but we're surveying service providers on, what kinds of new technology, what new services are they building and what new appetites are they seeing. And a lot of the service providers that we talk to are really, they see new opportunities in addressing those initiatives, right? The AI and the IoT and the sort of, implementation of emerging technologies, and they're actively building out solutions to try to sort of help address those use cases.
So to your point, Liam and Melanie, one of the things that we see, right, is that a lot of folks in organizations view cloud equals hyperscale. And that's actually why I would argue that you're seeing folks that have tried to do a lift and shift and have not seen the results that they are looking for. Or you're seeing a lot of folks that are now making that choice, as Melanie was saying, to modernize in place. And I think it's because they don't necessarily know about all of the options that are out there, right? Alternate clouds that give you a different set of outcomes are available to you. Clouds like our Expedient Enterprise Cloud are options that I don't think people necessarily understand enough about and understand the benefits that can be gathered for some of those kinds of workloads. And I think this is why we come back to this idea of not every cloud is fit for every workload, right? I think obviously that's true amongst the three hyperscalers. You can get different things that from AWS that you can get from Google or Azure, but you can get different things from AWS that you can get from an Expedient Enterprise Cloud as well. We have different benefits and different outcomes that you'll get from putting your workloads in a cloud like ours. And so I think that to me is one of the things that I've started to see organizations think a little bit more about, right? Is some of these alternative options. It's not necessarily keep things where they're at. It's not necessarily go all the way to a hyperscale. There are other options in a multi-cloud world that we can consider now.
And I think that's a really salient point there, because there are a lot of different providers you can go with, and there are also a lot of different approaches you can take to moving to the cloud and digital transformation and overall modernization. You can look at an AWS or an Azure, the hyperscalers, as kind of a building block for a DIY approach to things. Like if you look at the hyperscalers and all their different services, you can kind of look at that as a big box of Legos that, you've got all kinds of different bricks to, pretty much build whatever you want. And that actually works for a lot of companies. That's indeed what a lot of the born in the cloud, cloud native companies have already done. But then there are people who like the approach of you buy a Lego set, to build the Death Star, to build the Millennium Falcon. And your outcome is to build that thing and to have that thing, not go on this journey of exploration to get to that endpoint. So I think that's one thing that folks should keep in mind, is that cloud is like not about either or, it's all about and there are a bunch of different ways to get to cloud as well. You can do it with some help, you can do it on your own, or you could have a co-management approach where you do some of it yourself and you have a guide, managed services, alternate provider, some other type of entity to help you get the rest of the way.
And I love that Lego analogy of like, I can go and buy a whole bunch of pieces and try to put it together. In fact, I actually use this analogy using a Lego set that's over there somewhere now. But it's, hey, here's a set that looks like a Ferrari. Here's a set that is built to look like a car. Like, it's kind of there, but if you want the Ferrari, you need to go buy the Ferrari kit. Unless you're really, really, really talented. So I think that's actually a really great analogy on, cloud components versus building a full solution. So when we start to talk about those pieces, what is a successful cloud foundation, right? We know what we want to do. We know what our goal is of moving to a cloud, but what are the pieces that actually build a good foundation to start with? And I'll start with Mike, actually, on this one.
Great. Well, I think in order to really have a good cloud foundation, I think you have to know where you might consider landing your workloads. So I think you have to figure out what your consideration set should be from a workload location perspective. You don't want it to be infinite, but you also don't want it to be limited necessarily to a single location. So I think you have to kind of land on that. And then I think you have to have a set of multi-cloud infrastructure capability. You need to be able to have a network that can get you into the different cloud environments that you're planning on working in a timely fashion, depending on where your customers are, where your employees sit. You need to have a set of security tools that work across all your workload locations to keep your environment safe and secure. You need to have a set of potentially multi-cloud operations tools that allow you to monitor and manage the performance, the costs of your workloads across the various locations that you might be having them in, and try to kind of simplify your overall operations for your organization as you manage across workloads. And then finally, you need to have the ability to drive as much automation into the process as possible, right? Part of the value in the cloud environments that we have available to us today is obviously the diversity of capability, the emerging technologies that they open up to us. But another big value is the fact that we can automate much more in these cloud environments than we've ever been able to before. So I think having a plan for automating across your workload locations is that last place that I think you have to have that solid multi-cloud foundation.
I think it's really it's great that you went very technical on that, because I think something that you mentioned earlier was that a big part of this is cultural, right? And a big part of this is sort of transformation, change, cloud adoption. Doing that effectively has a lot to do with sort of setting the organization up for success. And that kind of requires alignment in a way across sort of policies and planning and governance and culture. And, the organization needs to sort of be aligned in its purpose, even while it's making kind of fundamental changes to, the ways in which it operates. And I kind of noticed this when I was glancing at the questions earlier. So I kind of wanted to touch on this here, but, a lot of the cloud vendors sort of push this notion of enterprises should create a cloud center of excellence as kind of a key step in this transformation process, right? Which is kind of, a cross-functional group or practice within the organization. It brings in, key stakeholders. It ensures kind of executive sponsorship. It is sort of given this key role in planning and executing the cloud strategy. So there's going to be, a lead architect, and there's going to be somebody there from finance, from operations, from security, from compliance. And the point is to make sure that all of those, all of the things that Mike just mentioned are being addressed at a sort of fundamental level when you're making your plan for cloud, right? And then, the success of this group, but then also the success of the effort can be measured in things like, the timeline for migration, or, how effectively you're controlling cost, or how compliant you are, or, the effectiveness of your governance or your code release schedule. And I mean, those are kind of metrics of the success of the cloud effort, but that's kind of, the idea is that the cloud center of excellence and the cloud effort are kind of synonymous, right? And then over time, as that strategy is sort of brought into being, that center of excellence, either becomes an operational group or becomes kind of an advisory group for where other parts of the organization sort of pick this stuff up. So, it can kind of contribute to the success of a cloud effort or a transformation effort, to the extent that, like, some of the the big public cloud providers who have long lists of competencies and I forget the other word, but competencies and other sort of certifications. Some of those, does your organization have a cloud center of excellence, is like part of the criteria for accomplishing some of those competencies or certifications.
And I think another way to look at this is that, cloud is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. Cloud isn't the point. Business and digital transformation is the point. And, one thing that is, can serve as a caution for people, if you're transforming your IT and you're looking at cloud as a way to do that, you have to keep in mind that, you kind of have to be all in on this transformation. The analogy I like to use is, if you just move the dust around in your house, you can't call that cleaning. You've just moved all the dirt from one place to another. So, kind of taking this approach of, going all in on the effort of modernizing and transformation, but, keeping in mind that that effort doesn't necessarily require you to go all in on public cloud necessarily.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. I love the analogy, Melanie. It's at the end of the day, we always have to remember it's about the business outcomes we're delivering here. And when we get into the weeds around the technology, and we get excited about what's possible with new cloud capabilities or whatnot, it's really easy for us to forget that as technology professionals. Sometimes I've done it myself many times over my 25 plus year IT career. And so it's a great reminder that we always got to bring it back to, is this delivering the business outcomes that our organization needs? Is it having a tangible impact for our clients and our customers that they can benefit from?
I also don't like being called out for moving dust around as not cleaning. Okay. Sometimes.
Well, hey, if you can't see the dust, it's not there, right?
Exactly. That's how you have to do it. Sometimes that's what rugs are for. Okay. But I think it's actually really interesting to kind of bring it back to that overall outcome, right? And I do this all the time. It's like, oh, look at this thing, and it's really cool, and it's going to do this thing, and it's going to move things over here, and it's going to be really neat. And then you go, well, why? Don't really have a why. And then I feel very silly. So kind of where does that sort of fit into, aligning costs that the business has to pay to services? How do you actually achieve workload optimization, not just use services for the sake of using them? I'll start. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to go to Mike first?
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I think one way to look at this is to points that Liam had brought up before is aligning costs with outcomes. One way is to figure out, can you do this yourself in-house, and how much would it cost you to get to the level where you could do it yourself? And it's a simple cost benefit trade-off. There is, if we can engage a third party to take care of this thing for us, why not do it? Because we have bigger fish to fry in terms of where we want to go with our business. So I think that's one of the first things is kind of look at this from the perspective: is it worth it for me to try to do this myself, or should I outsource it? Like my personal example is I can't manage to do my own laundry properly. So do I keep trying to do it? No. I have a laundry service that comes to pick it up. They pick up dirty clothes, they bring back clean clothes. That's all I care about. So that's one thing to think about IT skills gaps as well is, do you want clean clothes, or do you want to learn how to do laundry?
I mean, I think that's the overall thing. It's kind of that like Uber versus owning a car. Like, I can drive a car, no problem. I can park a car, no problem. Do I really want to drive all the time? How often do I drive? What's the cost of actually doing all that? And does it just make sense to have a third party do that? Mike, you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, I was going to kind of build on this point. And someone asked in the chat the question around what is the cost of Expedient Cloud compared to the big three hyperscale providers? And I would say is it depends, right? It depends on the workload that you're talking about. It depends on what your come from state is. It depends on, does cost even matter in this conversation, or is latency or performance from a CPU perspective or storage performance what matters for the application that you're dealing with? Is cost the most critical factor? And it isn't always. A friend of mine, Joe Daly, was having a conversation. He's a FinOps professional over at Nationwide, and we're going to have him on a webinar here soon. He was doing a podcast with Ryan Hughes, who's Nationwide's head of their cloud program, and they were talking about an example where one of their providers, or one of their architects, came in and said, by switching from this cloud service to this cloud service, I can make this particular batch job go from 2 hours to 10 minutes. And everybody looked at him and said, oh, that's great. How much more does it cost? Oh, it's only $400 more an hour. Now, is that meaningful in that context? Maybe, maybe not. But what he saw was he was very focused on one particular business outcome for a situation, and he missed the kind of the balance that you have to deliver what the business expects from us for a particular workload. Does that 4 hours he saved actually matter to anybody? It might, but in this case, it didn't. And he actually pissed off a whole bunch of people in the business because their prices went way up, right? So you have to really understand on a workload by workload basis what's most important if you're going to be most successful.
I want to add some stuff to that, because this is really lining up with kind of what I was thinking about. So I think that one of the interesting things about cost is, like I kind of alluded to this earlier, but cost is an area of complexity that is kind of introduced by cloud, and it's kind of a design challenge when it comes to cloud, as Mike was just outlining. Because there's variable pricing, because there's consumption-based pricing, that can be turned to your advantage, or it can really bite you depending on how well you execute within that, right? And then also, as was beginning to be illustrated here, like conceptually, the idea of cost can be pretty complicated, and it includes a lot of other things, right? A lot of things roll up into cost eventually. There's a cost to downtime, right? There's a cost to losing data. There's a cost to security breaches. There's a cost to performance issues. And so, at a very fundamental level, you kind of have to understand, are you trying to do the same thing for cheaper, or are you trying to build something, that's going to create revenue for your business. And those are actually two pretty different attitudes towards spending money, like spending $1 on a cloud service. And in our surveys, we actually ask that kind of question, and you can kind of compare them as personas and see different attitudes toward other things to do with spending on infrastructure. Like they have different expectations for ROI, right? They have different expectations for, performance when they're saying, I look at cloud as a means of taking costs out of operations, or I look at cloud as a means of creating new streams of revenue. So, from a survey standpoint, we're actually pretty careful about trying to frame things in terms of value for money versus cost, right? Versus just a strict matter of price. Because as Mike illustrated really well, price is one facet of what you're getting, and you're often weighing it against something else, right? If your most important thing is performance, or your most important thing is security, you're not going to probably get that by spending as little as possible. And then I think in terms of comparing the different components of the overall environment, some people find that a private cloud environment where you have dedicated resources is a more cost-effective way to execute. And that's probably going to be dependent on, how flexible the demand is for this particular service, or how much variance there is in the load for this particular workload. In the past, we've often heard that, when we ask, because I know it's kind of not an either or question, and we've kind of gone over that. But if you think about where am I placing a workload, and you're kind of weighing the benefits of public cloud versus a private cloud, we often used to hear that the main consideration there was security, right? Where people sort of envisioned or imagined that, the public cloud was less secure, the private cloud was more secure because they had more control. And I think over time we've seen that, that's not necessarily the case, right? It's more about how you execute security. And if you execute security effectively in the public cloud, it can be more secure than what you're doing on premises. But what we're seeing in the last few years is that the argument between public cloud and private cloud, or the argument for private cloud, in a lot of cases is now a cost argument, right? Where they say, if I have admins who are able to deal with X number of VMs or X number of containers on a day-to-day basis, this is just going to run more efficiently than me putting it in a public cloud and paying on a per VM basis. So I'll stop, but I think what this is all leading to is a need for better tooling to assess and sort of calculate cost, right? And a need for more expertise and more facility in doing that math and sort of creating that understanding, which again is leading to people buying new tools and acquiring new resources, and also people once again engaging with managed services, external service providers that have more of that expertise. An interesting thing that we see is that when we ask, how do you make the business case for dealing with a managed service around your consumption of public cloud, we want it to cost less is one of the main drivers of that, even though it costs money, right? They're spending money on the managed service in order to make the overall spend on cloud more efficient. And they expect a sort of cost benefit from that as well.
Yeah, it's really easy, if you don't know what you're doing, to make mistakes when you move an application into the public cloud and spend a whole lot of money really fast, right? You forgot to turn something off at night. You didn't calculate data transfer fees, and you put one thing on premises and one thing in AWS and one thing in Azure, and data's flowing all over the place. So you're ringing up a data transfer bill the whole time. There's lots and lots of ways you can get yourself in trouble if you don't have that knowledge and expertise to be able to run your cloud migration well. So I absolutely agree with you there, Liam. I think it's why organizations are leaning in on experts like managed service providers to help them on their journey, and it's saving them a lot of money to do it.
And I think that's this is a really great opportunity to figure out where your applications are and what talks to what. But I think getting into some of these questions that we have from the audience, which thank you everybody for putting in your questions. The first one, I'm pretty sure Liam just has a 2-word answer for this one. How do you decide which cloud is best for a specific need or business? I'm pretty sure I already know the answer to this one.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the perfect example of it depends, right? But what it depends on is what do you want to do, right? Do you want it to cost less than how you're doing it now? Do you want it to be more secure? Do you want it to be, so you decide based on the business objective of that interaction or that exchange, right? So
I see a lot of questions around security and specifically disaster recovery, but how are clouds and providers protecting customers? Whole lot of talk about the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, which they may have paid $5 million, they may have paid $90 million, who's to say? But there's seriously like 8 different reports out there. So how do you actually provide and do disaster recovery for a customer if you're looking to use, cloud-based SaaS and even things like Office 365 and not just your traditional applications?
Well, I think I can take that one. I think one thing to look at is to, kind of get a sense of what do you see your risks as being, and also, this whole idea of being able to take disaster recovery and business continuity and somehow shove responsibility for that off to a third party. It's maybe the wrong way to look at it. That security is disaster recovery is in some ways the side effect of not having good security in the first place. And it all comes back to architectural best practices. So, one way to look at this is don't wait until you have a disaster to start thinking about your disaster recovery policy. Take a big picture architectural approach to it at the beginning and look at it more as data protection. Look at it more as business continuity than specifically as disaster recovery. And I think that's a way you bake the concept of continuity, protection, and security into the cake as you're deciding what do we want our IT environment to look like to serve our business requirements.
Yeah, we actually just published an article in Forbes yesterday that talks about ransomware and an approach to tackling this problem. And we could talk about this for hours, right? So since we've got just a couple minutes left here, I'll just hit the highlights. The acronym that we used in that article was STUDY. We want you to first think about a top-down cybersecurity strategy. Second, you need to really have a suite of best-of-breed integrated cybersecurity tools that work across all of your workload locations, as we've been talking about. You need to stay up to date on your updates. Are you maintaining application and technology currency, right? Make sure that you have a robust capability for data protection. I didn't use protection, Melanie. I had used data protection because I needed a DE. And then you need to educate your staff on what to watch out for. A lot of times this is people making mistakes, clicking on links that they shouldn't, responding to emails, answering phone calls that lets the bad actors in. And so a lot of it includes an education campaign for your organization, for your employees. But there's a lot of really good stuff out there to help you kind of be prepared. And as Melanie was talking about it, it's both a proactive stop people from getting in, and then in case something happens, how do you protect yourself with the right kind of backups and recovery in case something does happen?
This question is directed to Liam from Avid Reader. In your surveys, have you gotten a sense of how confident decision makers are feeling in their choices and preparations for their transformations, for their digital transformations?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I don't think we ask that specifically. I do think we can get around to that by basically, we ask people, Well, so here's one measure of that is we say, what's your sort of take on digital transformation? And we've been asking that for 7 or 8 years, and so we ask them what stage they're at, and they're either considering it or planning it, or sort of actively involved in developing a strategy or actively executing on a strategy. We kind of block out the people who say they're actively executing on a strategy for digital transformation, and we refer to them as transformation leaders. And we look at them separately from the people who say, oh, we're thinking about it or we're not doing anything. And how do they answer a bunch of other questions? And so, we know a lot of the ways in which people that we would consider to be digital transformation leaders are different. They're more data driven. They're more sort of committed to cloud, but they're also more likely to have sort of a hybrid view of the world. They're more focused on app innovation than they are on sort of application maintenance and that kind of thing. But I think what you were asking was how confident are they about the choices that they've made? And I think the interesting point that I would call out is that even though most people have for approaching 10 years said, yes, we are moving toward digital transformation, or yes, this is sort of a organizational imperative for us. Right now, we're only at around 50% at that execution stage. So I think it's not just that people aren't confident about the choices that they have made. I think they're not confident in making the choice that they need to make, right? I think a lot of them they're not at the stage of actually doing something yet because they're still trying to figure out what is digital transformation going to mean for my organization? And the answer is, it depends.
So I have one last question here, and we're going to go with this one. In terms of cloud and SaaS, how are digital transformation trends, which seem to be accelerated by the pandemic over the last year, look and feel for business in 2021 versus 2020? Are they slowing down, or orgs playing catch up? And we'll just kind of go around the horn to finish this up. So I'll start.
Well, I can chime on that first. One thing that happened quite a lot in 2020 was, there was a scramble, there was a catch up with regard to, how do we pivot our business more digital so that, led to more cloud, and also how do we accommodate all of the employees who now have to work from home. So, we kind of saw a bit of a spike in VDI last year, but, it's kind of dying down a bit this year because, some of these transformational things, they're kind of one and done. We didn't have it before, we have it now, let's move on and get on with the rest of our lives. But, one thing I think that, has changed that we'll see more and more on deck for 2021 and beyond is just this whole idea of, how do we digitize more and more of our business operations? So, to some extent, that means infrastructure as a service, like our own applications, we distribute them widely by, putting them on a public cloud provider. And, part of it also means we go to SaaS for certain functions that our distributed supply chain, our distributed partner network, employee base, that they need as well. So, I think the big change has been that, cloud is a way to pivot on a dime and get things done really quickly. And, to that extent, I think that has yielded some confidence in the choices that were made. To the question that Liam answered is that, a lot of times it's some of this is going to be just trial and error. And the main thing to kind of mitigate any potential disasters that can come from that trial and error approach is making sure you have an architectural framework that's designed for agility, that you can fail fast and succeed at scale, and it's all good.
I agree with a lot of what Melanie just said, so I won't repeat it, or I won't. I'll say that I think the change from 2019 to 2020, so the pre-COVID to reacting to COVID, when we look back, we'll say that was a much, much bigger change for most organizations than the change from, during COVID to post-COVID. So I think that the big change is something they've already made. I think Melanie alluded to the fact that a lot of those things will be sort of not short-term investments, but the big expense kind of came during 2020. So if you look at the curve of spending, that might taper off for some of those things. And then the third thing I'll say is, this other factor that we haven't talked that much about is that the people who are making the decisions about the technologies to use and how to consume them aren't always the same people that are sort of signing the check. And so the person who is making the technology decision or is recommending the technology decision has to go and convince somebody of the business value. And that has been a challenge that we've seen people talk about in the past. And I think one of the effects of COVID was to really help to illustrate a lot of the non-financial benefits of investing in transformation, investing in cloud. And so I think making the business case for some of those technologies will be easier in the future.
I think we're out of time, AJ, so I'll let you wrap it up. Those were great ways to end.
We still have time for you to finish, but it's okay. I'll finish it up. So yes, thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Liam, so much for joining us today. Real quick, the giveaway winner is Linda Hall Tudor. Congratulations, Linda. Karen will be reaching out to you. Claps for Linda. Please join us next week as Mike kind of threw the spoiler out there. We're going to be doing an interview with Joe Daly from Nationwide to talk about FinOps. We talk a lot about DevOps and how we have to change our deployment methods and development methods for cloud. You also have to change your financial operations. And in the pre-call, he broke my brain for a little bit. So please join us next week to talk through FinOps with Joe Daly from Nationwide. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Mike. And we will see you next week.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.